welcome to another Teach Tuesday video from the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning here at UW Green Bay. Todd, what's our Teach Tuesday topic for this week?
Well, this week we have a classic topic, online discussions. And I should almost put that in air quotes because one thing oftentimes online discussions are not is an actual discussion, and that can be a source of frustration for a lot of people. And so oftentimes they're just serial monologues. You know, one person says something, another person, you know, they may or may not read that thing and they respond, and it can be a source of real frustration for people. So I looked around and I found some people who had come up with a novel way to deal with online discussions and actually make online discussions that are really interesting. So I talked to Jana Fogaca, who's a new professor in psychology and human development. And she worked with Kate Farley in our own CATL office and Jodi Pierre in the library to come up with a new process for doing discussions that I think is really interesting.
Okay, so I look forward to hearing about that. Why don't you go put on a sweater and I'll rearrange my living room, and then through the power of editing, we can come back and wrap it up at the end.
All right, sounds good. Welcome to Teach Tuesday, a bi-weekly series from the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning. Today we're talking about discussions. And discussions, especially in an online forum, are in many ways a necessary evil that a lot of instructors feel like they have to go through. That you know, they're kind of dull and repetitive, and you see those unread messages in your Canvas course or your D2L course, and it can kind of put a feeling in the pit of your stomach that is uncomfortable. And so a lot of people sort of shy away from them, and they're not very much fun oftentimes. However, they don't have to be that way. And we have one of our more creative instructors here today, Jana Fogaca, who came up with an interesting way to go through and do discussions in her capstone course and really tie them tightly to her course objectives and make them, I think, really interesting for the people in the course, and so that they sort of build towards something meaningful in terms of doing their assignments. So, and to do that, she recruited some help from across campus, from Jodi Pierre from the library and Kate Farley from the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning. So we'll start with Jana. So Jana, tell us about the discussions and how they're different than other discussions you've done in the past.
So this is for a capstone course, and what I thought I could do is to divide them into small groups. So some weeks they have the discussion with the full class, but what is different in this class is that many of these weeks, the weeks of the semester, they're working within small groups. And I know that this has been done before, but what is different really is that I separated, they volunteered themselves into different groups, but it's the same group that they're going to do the final paper with. And it's the discussions involve the topic of the final paper as well, so it works as a way of scaffolding what they're going to be writing about in the end of the semester. So they're basically working on their final paper throughout the whole semester within their groups, but also that I force them to look into the discussion of the other groups as well, so they can learn from other aspects of performance. And so which is the topic of the class. So the class is about psychology of performance, and the 5 groups are sport performance, music performance, surgery or performance in surgery, in business, and then in academics, so like taking exams or presenting in a class. So we go, like in a nutshell, we have a lot of topics that they're going to learn of different psychological aspects that affect performance, and then every week they're going to have discussions, and some of these they're going to see, well, how does what we learned this week apply to surgeons, and how does it apply to academics or taking an exam, but also forcing them to reply to other groups, make them not be restricted to learning only about their area of performance. So if they're in the surgery group, they still have to, at least once in the semester, they're going to pass through the sports group, see what they're discussing, see what are similarities, differences, but so that's I think And another portion that I forgot to mention is that every week a different student has to bring a peer-reviewed article related to that topic to the discussion. So they can also use these articles towards their final paper as well, and it's part of the discussion.
So the discussion is meeting a couple different, I don't want to say objectives, but goals, I guess. So one goal is that students are discussing the course material from the perspective of their subdiscipline within performance. So either they're a surgeon, or they're an athlete, or they're a musician, or something like this. And then, which is, I think, pretty typical. I mean, I think most people want to do that in discussions. They want students to talk about the content of the class. But then there's also a couple other things that they're doing. One is that they're not doing it from the perspective of themselves as a student reading the material. They're taking on a perspective that they might have as a professional, right? So as a capstone class, right, they're sort of making that mental transition, right, to the next stage, right,
Yes.
post-graduation, which sounds pretty cool. I don't know if you're noticing that in the class or not.
That they're transitioning?
Yeah, so they're starting to think of themselves more as those professionals that they're training themselves to become.
It's very interesting because even in the midterm evaluations that I sent them on Qualtrics, some of them said, well, I didn't think I was going to like this class, but actually it's very interesting, and it's nice that I can apply it to my own life. Even if I'm not going to work with performance psychology, I can think about the variables that affect my own performance as, in my work, whatever, they're going to do later on. They can think about things that affect their own performance and, how things that they can do to try to manage that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so I guess everyone has to perform, right? And
Yes.
so, yeah, no matter what
Definitely.
you do.
We're right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I should have taken your class before this, yeah.
Yes.
You agree, I see.
I recommend my class to everyone.
Yeah. So not only they're doing that, they're building those transferable skills, which is cool. But then they're also building a bibliography that's concrete beyond just sort of transferring it to their career. They're transferring it to their final project, right? And so, are students recognizing that? Did that come across in your midterm evaluations as well, or that students they grasp that, or is that sort of just baked into the assignment?
Yeah. So they this week is actually the due date for the first draft of the literature review, and they were a little confused. Like, it's kind of I think, even though it's in the syllabus and even though I explained, they were not realizing how much of the work they had already done. And I think that's when, the part of like the participation that Jodi provided was very helpful, because we just did this last week, and it was really helpful for them to find new articles. So I think they're getting a better idea of this transition into the paper now and how it connects. It's kind of like, I don't know, kind of like Mr. Miyagi kind of thing. So, you have the articles, you discussed, and now, write about it in your final paper. But I think it took them a little bit to realize the transition to the final paper. But it's good. Also, because it's a writing course, they have like a feedback on the first draft. They can go back and edit. So it's like kind of low stakes first step. And
so it's sort of like a dress rehearsal then for their final essay to a certain degree.
I think that's a common thing that I've found when people are scaffolding assignments, that students think that it's too easy and they think that they're doing it wrong, but it's just that they've built up to this moment, so it's really beneficial for them.
So you brought up Jodi's role in the assignment then in terms of building the bibliography. So why don't you explain, Jodi, what your role was then in helping Jana build this discussion assignment?
Yeah, so research weeks and online classes are somewhat common in that a librarian will be embedded and be involved in a discussion one week where it's just the students are working on their lit review or some other research activity, and the librarian is there to offer guidance and maybe ask a few structured questions. And I took an activity that I read about that was meant for an in-person class and adapted it to the online setting, where it's, I used Qualtrics to do this guided reflective search activity that prompts the students to think about what they're doing, try to reflect on why their search might have worked well or why it didn't, what did work well. And then after completing this activity that's really supposed to help them build their metacognitive skills, then there's the guided discussion part of it. And they reflect on what they experienced and what worked well, and then hopefully, and I think we've seen a little bit of this, talk with the other students and get that idea of, you know, oh, well, this worked for me, this didn't work for me. Oh, I didn't have that happen. How did you get that to work? And a little bit of social learning going on.
How are you, so I'm interested in a couple things. So the questions in your surveys, how do you sort of get in a Qualtrics survey at the metacognition types of questions for the students to think about?
Yeah, so in the traditional version of an online research week, it's the students go out and they do some searching, and then they come back and answer some questions. And this is something that they're supposed to complete while they're searching, and it, you know, did you get the results you expected, yes or no? And then depending on what they answer, they'll get one set of questions to answer or another. So there are a few different branches of logic in what shows up, and having them pause from what they're searching and what they're working on and think about what they're doing.
Okay, interesting. So do you have some examples of those sort of search terms in action, or?
The search terms all come from the students.
Okay.
So it's...
or how an example maybe of how a student might have gone through the survey that highlights the metacognitive questions at work.
So yeah, a lot of it is, you know, go through and try this method of searching. What did you use for doing that? Did you get what you were expecting to find? If not, what do you think the difference is? I think what else I have here. How successful do you think your search was? Does anything meet the requirements of the assignment? And then encouraging them to try different search strategies that they may not have. And I built in a little bit of instruction in there as well in terms of watching an instructional video on how to do some advanced searching. And then come back to this and give that a try and see how it works.
And then so you get then the output of that survey, and then you respond to the students through the survey, in a sense? Or
through the discussion board,
through the discussion,
yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, point out, oh, it's really great that you brought up this. I'm glad you noticed that. Or, I'm sorry you were having trouble with this. But it's a difficult concept that a lot of
Sure.
students aren't particularly used to if they haven't searched that way before.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that was an option. Huh.
So what I did was to put her instructions and the Qualtrics link as a prompt of the week discussion, and say you have to, you know, do this and then answer at least two of those questions, which was, you know, what she had proposed. So, but then I put them to discuss within their group. So they're talking, well, you know, choke was not choke, because we use choke is more like a slang of, you know, failing under pressure. So they're commenting, well, I tried to use choke, but it didn't work. So I used underperformance, and then that worked better. So they can see what other people use, and they say, oh, I had this problem too. And someone like, oh, I like the thesaurus, and someone else like, I hate it. Thesaurus. And she was very good at providing also answers like, well, maybe you could try this other words, or maybe you could, you know, please notice that the thesaurus give this type of, you know, output, and if you use the same word with like thesaurus or not, you're gonna get different outputs, and other little tips of like how to see who cited that paper, or, you know, different things in the search engine that they're not used to looking at. So that was basically her activity, was a prompt for the weekly discussion, and then I put them to discuss within their group so they can see also the words that worked out or strategies that worked out, because they were all now, and they are now hopefully looking for more articles to put in their literature review that is due on Sunday. So now they have like this activity helping them figure out how to find, because I have a lot of questions, not only in this class, but anything that I get them to find peer review articles. They're like, oh, I'm having difficulty. At least like 2-3 people are having difficulty, even though they took research methods before. So I think that was very helpful, and especially having her to reply the discussions too, because she knows a lot more than I do. Even I learned some stuff. So, and even one of the students said, oh, I wish I had done this before because it was so helpful.
Interesting. So one of the interesting things about that to me is that students are starting with a layperson's term, like choke, right? Which of course can have many different meanings, but that you're trying to get them to go towards a more professional word that would be more specific to help them do a more productive search, I imagine. Right? So do you find that students are making through this interaction that transition from a more layperson's understanding of whatever topic it is that they're interested in to a more sort of professional and refined understanding, even just through the search terms that they're using?
Some of them definitely did.
Yeah.
And if they didn't do it through just doing the survey activity, I think they're picking up on that in the discussion with their fellow students.
That's interesting. I mean, it's a really sort of subtle way in which, those transitions we were talking about earlier where Jana was helping students make the transitions to their life outside of school, where their professional life is. This is another way in which that's happening, in a sense, that they have this sort of really layperson understanding that they're refining, and they're sort of using those terms to accomplish tasks, which is pretty cool, it seems to me.
Well, they're also going to be working backwards. So
Right.
their final project is to translate what they've learned from these discussions too, and then they're going to be making something public out of it. So they have to use language that would be accessible to an audience outside of their classroom.
There's a block.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so maybe, do you want to explain your role in the assignment then, Kate?
Sure. So Jana and I were talking about how we could do this in Qualtrics because the way that the Canvas discussions are set up are not conducive to self-sign-up.
Sure.
And so we wanted to make something that would allow students to choose which group they wanted to be a part of. So we set up a Qualtrics survey that had the different content expert fields, and then there was a quota. So only, was it 4 people or 4 people per group were allowed to sign up for that topic. And then once 4 people had signed up for that group, that option would go away. So that's how we kind of controlled the number of people within a group. And then they received an email after they filled out the survey that said, hey, you're in the surgery group. And then they knew who they were supposed to be talking with. And Jana set up a schedule that had a table and columns and said which student was the content expert for that week. My role was kind of in the initial logistics of how to get students into groups. And then I'm going to be coming in at the end of the semester to show students how to use WordPress to build those blogs.
Okay. Are there any, Jana, any unintended benefits of doing your discussions this way that you had anticipated that, as you've gone on in the semester, that have become apparent to you? Or?
I don't know. I think it was nice to give them the option of signing up to the groups, because I could have just randomly assigned them. It would be really more easier than to figure out later on. But I think it was nice because I got like people with experience in music in the music group, and people even who like gave up their career or business to study psychology, and now they're in the business group. So I think it was really, I thought that was going to be beneficial to give them the choice, but I think it was even more than I initially thought, because they can bring all these different experiences. It was also nice to give the option of rotating comments. Sometimes they even comment on groups they're not forced to comment on that week in that group, but they're just interested in the topic in that group and say, hey, someone in my family is a medical resident and he passed out before his first surgery, and relating to the content. And I think I didn't expect to see to this choice and everything to be that positive, but it was pretty good.
Yeah, that's a great sign. People are participating in discussions that they're not getting grades in, or that they're not necessarily having to. That's a sign of a good assignment, I think. Most people, a lot of times people just do their 2 comments a week, and then that's it. Are there any things that you take away from? So you sort of designed this discussion to sort of meet a specific goal, right? You had a specific assignment that you were trying to help students sort of scaffold their way towards. But in the interest of transferable skills, are there anything that you're going to take away from this particular discussion and use in any of your other classes?
I don't know. I think it's an interesting way of getting them, like giving a little bit of choice and also getting them involved in like very specific ways of thinking. I do try to do, even in other courses that I'm not using the same type of discussion. I always try to get into prompts that make them like think in more complex ways or intrigue them. It's not just like check and do the discussion. So I think in that sense I kind of already do it. I have some activities that I do in class with my personality class that I've been thinking about transforming into small groups discussions with the Harry Potter stuff that I like to do with in the beginning of the Theories of Personality course. So I've been thinking about maybe doing something similar. But I think it's nice to have a mix of some group discussions and some like small group and then whole class discussions, and especially because in the end most of the students are not reading every single person. So if they have a small group that they are discussing it on a topic, I think it's more likely that they're going to go through everything in their small group. So yeah, I think I'll maybe mix a little bit of that in some of my other courses.
Interesting. So do you have any advice to instructors who are wondering if they should be reconfiguring their discussions, but are worried that it's going to be a lot of work?
I don't think it's like too much more work than regular discussions. The grading thing in that case is a little bit trickier, but I think other than that, it's just really that first week in assigning people. What I do in all of my classes, not only this, but I do a lot of information repeated everywhere, and I know that it sounds like a lot of work, but I get a lot less emails than other professors who go like, I don't know what I have to do this week. Every week I have similar deadlines, and it helps. So it helps them, but it helps me too. So I feel like it's not really that much more work. I think it's fine.
That's good. I wanted to close the loop on one thing I already brought up earlier. So if someone wants an embedded librarian in their class, how do they get one, and what does an embedded librarian do?
Okay, yeah. Embedded librarians can be involved in, we use the term particularly for online classes, and the level of involvement can really range based on if they're just adding particular learning objects into a course related to library instruction, whether that's web evaluation or how to search in databases. So the lowest level involvement would probably be just adding content to a course. But it can increase to something like this, where it's an activity that's built into the class and involves an active discussion board with the librarian. And contact the library. We are happy to help. We have a team of instruction librarians who really enjoy doing this type of work.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for taking time out of your busy weeks to come and talk with us. And I know that it's going to have be an inspiration to some people out there who have had discussions sort of gnawing at their soul, and they're wanting to do something about it. So thanks again.
Thank you.
And welcome back. So I have to admit, I think discussions were a little bit more interesting than even I thought they were going to be. But what are our takeaways for this week? Todd?
Yeah, there was a lot of information in Jana's presentation, and Kate and Jodi as well. But I think that the thing that's transferable to other instructors is the idea that in some ways, the more you embrace the nature of online discussions, the more they can actually become satisfying discussions, right? So that the way that Jana did it was by giving students multiple means and multiple reasons to want to engage in them, right? They were obviously a way to sort of go over the week's material, the content for the week, but they were also ways to help students build a bibliography for their final project. And finally, they're a way for them to practice those transferable skills that they're going to use when they become psychologists after they graduate. And so that because they had all those reasons to do it, she actually had people participating in discussions when they didn't have to, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, cool. So I hope that the instructors watching can implement at least part of what they learned today. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks.